Jefferson High School stood in the middle of a busy little town. It was the kind of school where the old red brick walls carried stories from decades ago, and the tall green trees that surrounded the playground whispered secrets to anyone who listened closely. Every morning, students rushed through the gates, their laughter mixing with the sound of sneakers tapping against the floor and lockers slamming shut. To some, it was just another school. But to others, it was a stage where friendships, dreams, and struggles all played out at once. Among these students was a girl named Maya. She was 16 years old, with bright eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. She wasn't the type to stand in the middle of a crowd or try to be the loudest in the room. Instead, she carried herself with quiet strength, always walking calmly with her books pressed to her chest. Maya loved to read, and she often found peace in the corners of the library, away from the chaos of teenage drama. For her, school was a place to learn, to build her future, and to stay focused. But Jefferson High wasn't perfect. Like any other school, it had its share of noise, gossip, and groups of kids who thought they were better than everyone else. The hallways buzzed with energy every morning, as groups of friends gathered near lockers sharing jokes or scrolling through their phones. Teachers stood at their doors reminding students to hurry to class. The smell of cafeteria food drifted down the hallway, a mix of pizza, fries, and mystery meals that students both loved and complained about. On the surface, everything looked normal. But in every school, there are those who don't treat others with kindness. Jefferson High was no different. There were students who laughed too loudly at someone's mistake, kids who whispered cruel words behind others' backs, and those who pushed weaker classmates around just to feel powerful. Maya had seen it all before. She wasn't blind to the way some students treated others. She knew there were bullies roaming the halls, waiting for the right moment to make someone feel small. But Maya was strong inside. Even though she didn't always speak up, she carried a sense of dignity and respect that came from her family, especially her father. Her father, Chief Daniels, was known throughout town. Everyone respected him, not only because he was the police chief, but also because he was fair and honest. Maya admired him deeply. She carried his lessons in her heart every day. Always respect yourself, always respect others, and never let fear control you. Those words gave her courage even when she felt like the world was against her. Still, being one of the few black girls in the school wasn't always easy. Some days she felt the stares, the whispered comments, or the silent walls that people built between her and them. But Maya refused to let those things define her. She believed in rising above, in proving that kindness and intelligence were stronger than hate. That morning, as she walked through the hallways of Jefferson High, the same routine played out. She clutched her books, gave a polite smile to the librarian as she passed, and avoided the rowdy group of kids near the lockers. She was used to their laughter and their teasing of others. It was just noise to her, and she had bigger dreams to chase. But while Maya believed in minding her own business, the world around her wasn't always so forgiving. Jefferson High had its troublemakers, students who thought bullying was entertainment. And among them was Jake. Everyone knew his name. He had a reputation for picking fights, mocking others, and making himself look strong at the expense of those who couldn't fight back. Jake liked being feared. He liked the attention. For him, school was not about learning or growing. It was about showing off, proving that he was the toughest guy in the hallways. Maya had noticed Jake before. She had seen him push smaller kids, laugh at their pain, and walk away without a second thought. She never understood why he behaved like that. Maybe he was insecure. Maybe he wanted to hide his own weaknesses. Whatever the reason, Maya always kept her distance. She believed it was best to avoid trouble. On that particular day, the sun was shining brightly outside, casting warm light into the classrooms. Students filled the hallways, chatting about homework, music, and weekend plans. Everything seemed ordinary, just another day at Jefferson High. But hidden in the normal sounds of lockers and laughter was the beginning of something unexpected, something that would soon change not only Maya's day, but her entire school experience. For Maya, walking into school that morning felt like any other day. She didn't know that someone was watching her, waiting for a chance to cause trouble. She didn't know that her quiet strength would soon be tested in front of everyone. And she certainly didn't know that the name of her father, the police chief, would soon echo through the halls of Jefferson High in a way no one would forget. In that ordinary morning, with students laughing and teachers preparing for lessons, Maya stepped forward into a day that was about to be anything but ordinary. Jake was the kind of boy everyone at Jefferson High knew about, even if they had never spoken to him. His presence filled the hallways like a storm cloud on a sunny day, unpredictable, intimidating, and impossible to ignore. He wasn't the tallest student nor the strongest, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made people step aside when he passed. He walked with a swagger, chin lifted, like he owned the hallways. To his friends, he was fearless. To most others, he was nothing short of a nightmare. Teachers knew his name by heart. His file in the principal's office was thicker than most textbooks, filled with reports of bad behavior, detentions, fights, skipped classes, and disrespect toward staff. But Jake didn't care. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the attention. For him, rules were meant to be broken, and the more people talked about him, the more powerful he felt. His friends followed him around like shadows, laughing at his jokes, cheering at his pranks, and pretending to admire his courage. Deep down, though, many of them feared him too. They knew that if they ever stood against him, they would become his next target. So they stayed close, feeding his ego and ensuring they were safe from his cruelty. That morning, Jake leaned against the lockers at the far end of the hallway. His friends circled him, their voices loud and careless, disturbing the calm of the school before first period. Jake was telling a story about how he taught a freshman a lesson the previous day. He mimicked the boy's frightened expression while his friends howled with laughter. To them it was entertainment. To Jake it was victory. But underneath his boldness was something he never admitted to anyone. Jake wasn't a confident young man, he was insecure. At home, things were far from perfect. His father was strict and rarely showed him kindness, and his mother was often too tired from working long shifts to pay much attention. Jake felt invisible at home, so he made sure he wasn't invisible at school. Picking on others became his way of proving that he mattered, even if it was through fear. As Jake laughed with his friends, his eyes scanned the hallway. He always searched for someone new to target, someone who looked weak, quiet, or different. That was how he fed his pride. He saw groups of friends chatting, students rushing to class, and loners walking with their heads down. But then his gaze landed on Maya. She was walking calmly with her books in her arms, moving with the kind of quiet grace that seemed out of place in the noisy, chaotic hallway. Maya wasn't looking at him. In fact, she wasn't paying attention to anyone at all. She simply walked with her usual calm expression, her eyes focused straight ahead, and that to Jake was all it took. "Look at her," Jake muttered to his friends, nodding in Maya's direction. "She thinks she's better than everyone walking around like that." One of his friends shrugged. "She's just minding her own business, man." But Jake smirked. "Exactly. That's the problem. People like her need to be reminded who runs this place." The group laughed nervously. They knew what was coming. Jake had chosen his next target, and there was no turning back. As Maya drew closer, Jake pushed himself off the locker and stepped directly into her path. She stopped abruptly, trying not to bump into him. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and Maya felt the weight of his stare. It wasn't curiosity. It was challenge, hostility, the kind of look that made the air heavy. "Hey," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Where do you think you're going? Too important to say hi?" Maya frowned but didn't respond. She had learned long ago that ignoring bullies was often the best way to avoid trouble. She shifted slightly, trying to walk around him, but Jake moved to block her path again. His friends chuckled behind him, forming a small circle that made it harder for Maya to leave. "Come on, don't be shy," Jake pressed, grinning. "You think you're better than us? Walking around here like some kind of queen?" Maya's voice was calm when she finally spoke. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I'm just trying to get to class." Her words were steady, but inside she felt her chest tighten. She knew Jake's type, loud, cruel, hungry for control. And she also knew that giving him a reaction might only make things worse. Still, she couldn't let him completely silence her. Jake smirked at her reply, but her calm tone irritated him. Bullies like him fed on fear, and Maya wasn't giving him any. That made him feel small. And he hated feeling small. His friends nudged each other, whispering comments and laughing, waiting to see what Jake would do next. He couldn't back down now. His pride wouldn't let him. Jake leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Careful. You don't want to get on my bad side." Maya looked him straight in the eyes, her grip tightening on her books. She didn't speak, but the firmness in her gaze unsettled him for just a second. It was a look that said she wasn't as weak as he wanted her to be. The bell rang loudly, echoing through the hallways, signaling the start of first period. Students began hurrying past, glancing curiously at the scene but too afraid to intervene. Jake stepped back, giving her a mocking bow. "See you around, princess," he sneered, letting her pass. Maya walked on, her heartbeat racing, but she didn't let him see her fear. Behind her, Jake's laughter filled the hallway, echoing like a promise that this was far from over. And deep inside, Jake was already planning his next move. The morning passed slowly for Maya after her run-in with Jake. She sat in class, but her mind replayed the hallway scene over and over. She tried to focus on the teacher's voice, the equations on the board, and the sound of pencils scratching across paper. But Jake's mocking grin kept flashing in her memory. She told herself to shake it off. She had dealt with rude comments before. She knew not everyone at Jefferson High was kind, and she usually managed to avoid trouble. But this time felt different. This time the bully's attention had turned directly toward her. Jake, meanwhile, sat in the back of his own class, barely pretending to pay attention. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pencil against the desk, a sly smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Most kids dreaded math class, but Jake wasn't even pretending to care. Instead, he was planning. He had seen the way Maya looked at him, calm, collected, unshaken. That look had gotten under his skin. He thrived on fear, and she hadn't given him any. To him, that was disrespect. And in his world, disrespect couldn't be ignored. When the lunch bell rang, the cafeteria came alive with noise and chatter. Students rushed to claim their favorite tables, carrying trays piled with sandwiches, fries, and cartons of milk. The room buzzed with energy, laughter echoing from every corner. Maya carried her tray quietly, balancing an apple and a small salad, heading toward her usual table near the back. She liked sitting there because it was away from the chaos, a quiet spot where she could eat and maybe read a few pages from her book before the next class. But Jake had been waiting for this moment. He and his friends had chosen a table directly in the middle of the cafeteria, a spot where everyone could see them. He spotted Maya the second she walked in. With a quick nod to his group, he set his plan into motion. "Watch this," Jake whispered, grinning as he stood up. He strolled across the cafeteria, each step deliberate, his presence drawing the attention of curious eyes. Conversation slowed and students leaned in, sensing something was about to happen. Jake thrived on these moments. He loved the stage, the spotlight, and the way silence followed him like a shadow when he set his sights on someone. Maya felt the change in the room before she even saw him. The cafeteria seemed to quiet just enough for her to notice the shift. She glanced up, and there he was, Jake, walking straight toward her with that same smug grin. Her heart skipped, but she forced herself to remain calm. She placed her tray on the table and sat down, hoping he would pass by. But he didn't. "Hey, Maya," Jake said loudly, making sure the entire room could hear. "Mind if I sit here?" He didn't wait for an answer. He slid into the seat across from her, leaning back casually as if he owned the table. His friends gathered nearby, snickering and whispering, forming a loose circle around them. Maya kept her eyes on her salad, her fork steady in her hand. "This seat's taken," she said calmly. Jake chuckled. "By who? You don't sit with anyone. You always sit here alone. Thought you might want some company." There was laughter from the group behind him. Jake leaned forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "What's the matter? Too good to sit with the rest of us?" Maya looked up, her eyes steady. "No, I just don't want to sit with you." Her words, simple and direct, cut through the cafeteria noise like a blade. The kids nearby gasped quietly, waiting for Jake's reaction. No one ever spoke to him that way. Jake's smile faltered for just a second, but he quickly recovered, masking his irritation with a laugh. "Oh, tough girl, huh? Think you're smarter than me?" Maya didn't respond. She picked up her apple and took a bite, her calmness making his skin crawl. For Jake, silence was an insult. He thrived on reactions, fear, tears, anger. Anything but this unshaken composure. "Tell you what," Jake said loudly, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "Why don't you stand up and say something funny for the whole cafeteria? Show us what makes you so special." Maya shook her head. "I don't need to prove anything to you." The cafeteria grew quieter. Students abandoned their meals just to watch. Jake was used to these moments, but this one wasn't going the way he expected. Maya wasn't trembling. She wasn't begging him to leave her alone, and that made him furious. Without warning, Jake reached across the table and snatched Maya's apple from her hand. He held it up for his friends to see, then took a big bite out of it, chewing exaggeratedly. The crowd laughed, but the sound was nervous, uncertain. Maya sat still, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Instead, she leaned forward and said softly, "You're only making yourself look small." Jake froze. Her words, quiet as they were, hit harder than any insult he'd ever heard. For the first time, he felt something he wasn't used to, shame. But he couldn't let the cafeteria see that. He slammed the apple back down on her tray and stood up quickly. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low and sharp. As he walked back to his table, his friends tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. The cafeteria slowly returned to its usual noise, but the tension lingered in the air. Everyone had seen it. Maya standing her ground, Jake walking away without victory. Maya sat quietly, finishing her salad. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't let it show. She knew this wasn't the end. Jake wasn't the type to back down. If anything, he would come after her harder now. But she also knew something else. She wasn't afraid, and that calm strength of hers, the strength Jake couldn't break, was exactly what would lead to the moment when he finally regretted everything. The day after the cafeteria incident, the halls of Jefferson High buzzed with whispered conversations. Word had spread quickly. Everyone had seen or heard about how Maya stood up to Jake without raising her voice, without showing fear. For some students, she became a quiet hero. For others, it was simply shocking. No one had ever dared to defy Jake so openly. But for Jake, it was humiliation. And humiliation was something he couldn't tolerate. Jake's pride had taken a heavy blow. That night, as he sat in his messy room with posters peeling from the walls and music blaring to cover the silence of his house, he replayed the scene in his mind. He remembered the way Maya looked at him, calm and fearless. He remembered her words, "You're only making yourself look small." They echoed in his ears like a mocking chant. The more he thought about it, the more he seethed. To him, it wasn't just about one girl, it was about his reputation. If people thought Maya had made a fool of him, he'd lose the respect and fear that kept him at the top of the social chain. By morning, Jake had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let it slide. He wasn't going to let Maya's quiet strength go unanswered. Today he would show everyone that no one, especially Maya, could make him look weak. The first classes of the day passed quietly for Maya. She was aware of the stares, the whispers, but she chose to ignore them. She focused on her notes, her books, her lessons. She carried herself as she always did, with dignity. But inside, she knew Jake wouldn't let things rest. She could feel the storm brewing, the weight of eyes watching her every move. It happened between classes. The hallway was crowded, lockers clanging as students grabbed their books and hurried toward their next classrooms. Maya walked calmly, her books pressed to her chest, when suddenly she felt a strong hand shove her shoulder. She stumbled against the lockers, her books nearly slipping from her arms. The laughter that followed was cruel, sharp, and unmistakable. Jake stood there blocking her path, his friends forming a loose circle around them. Students slowed their pace, watching from the corners of their eyes. They didn't dare step in, but they weren't going to miss the show either. Well, Jake sneered, his voice loud enough to carry down the hallway. "If it isn't Little Miss Perfect. Thought you could embarrass me in front of everyone yesterday, huh?" Maya steadied herself, her heartbeat quickening. She looked at him, her expression calm, though inside she felt the weight of 100 eyes. "I didn't embarrass you, Jake. You did that to yourself," the crowd gasped softly. Jake's face darkened, his jaw tightening. He stepped closer, his finger jabbing the air near her. "You think you're smart, don't you? You think you can talk back to me and get away with it?" Maya didn't flinch. She clutched her books tighter, her voice steady. "I think everyone deserves respect, including me." The hallway grew eerily quiet. Even the usual noise of slamming lockers seemed to fade. Jake's friends shifted uneasily, unsure of how far he would take things. But Jake's pride pushed him further. He couldn't stop now. With a sudden movement, Jake slapped the books from Maya's hands. They scattered across the floor, papers fluttering like wounded birds. Laughter erupted from a few of his friends, but it was nervous laughter, shaky and unsure. Students standing nearby watched, some with pity in their eyes, others frozen with fear. Maya bent down slowly, gathering her papers. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm. She refused to give Jake the satisfaction of seeing her break. She picked up her books one by one, her movement steady, deliberate. Jake crouched slightly, his face inches from hers as she picked up a notebook. "Say something now," he taunted, his voice low and menacing. "Come on, smart girl. Show everyone how tough you are." Maya lifted her head, her eyes meeting his with unwavering strength. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried through the tense silence of the hallway. "Real strength isn't about hurting people, Jake. It's about protecting them." For a moment, something flickered in Jake's eyes. A hesitation, a crack in his armor, but just as quickly it vanished, replaced by anger. He grabbed the notebook from her hand and tossed it down the hallway. Pages ripped loose and scattered across the floor. That was the final straw for some of the students watching. A few girls shook their heads, muttering under their breath. One boy whispered, "This is too much." But no one dared step forward. The fear of becoming Jake's next target kept them frozen in place. Maya rose to her feet, standing tall even without her books. She faced him squarely, her chin lifted, her voice clear. "One day, Jake, you're going to regret all of this. Maybe not today, but soon, because people who live on fear never win in the end." Her words sliced through the hallway like a blade. Jake opened his mouth to snap back, but no words came. He clenched his fists, his pride burning. But something in Maya's calm defiance unsettled him more than any fight ever could. The bell rang, shattering the moment. Teachers emerged from their classrooms, ordering students to move along. The crowd dispersed reluctantly, but not before glancing at Jake and Maya one last time. Whispers filled the air, about her courage, about his cruelty, about the tension that was far from over. Jake stormed off, his friends trailing behind him. His pride was bruised again, and this time the wound cut deeper. He had escalated things, tried to humiliate Maya, but somehow she had turned it back on him. The more she resisted, the weaker he felt, and that weakness gnawed at him like fire. Maya bent down to pick up the last of her papers, her hands steady once more. She felt the sting of embarrassment, the ache of being targeted, but she also felt something stronger. Resolve. She knew Jake wouldn't stop here. She knew he would keep pushing, keep trying to break her, but she also knew that she wasn't alone, not truly. Somewhere deep inside, she carried her father's lessons, his voice reminding her of strength, respect, and courage. As she walked to her next class, her head held high, she didn't know what would come next. But she was ready, and Jake, though he didn't realize it yet, was walking straight toward the moment when his cruelty would turn into his greatest regret. The tension in Jefferson High had reached a breaking point. After the hallway confrontation, whispers about Jake and Maya spread faster than wildfire. Everyone talked about how Maya had faced Jake without fear, how she hadn't cried or begged, how her words had cut through his bravado like sharp glass. For the first time, Jake's invincibility was questioned, but Jake didn't see it that way. To him, the story was twisted. He told himself Maya had disrespected him in front of the entire school, that she had made him look weak. He couldn't let that stand. He wanted revenge, and he wanted it soon. His pride demanded it. That afternoon, Jake sat in the principal's office, slouched in the chair as the principal lectured him. It wasn't the first time he had been there, and he knew the routine by heart. Words like discipline, respect, and consequences were thrown around, but they never stuck. Jake had been suspended before, sent home with warnings, forced to write apology letters he never meant. Nothing ever changed. To him, the principal was just another adult wasting breath. This time, though, something felt different. The principal wasn't just lecturing him. He was firm, almost angry. He leaned across the desk, his voice stern. "Jake, this has gone too far. You didn't just disrupt the school. You assaulted another student." "This is serious," Jake smirked, trying to play it off. "Come on, it was just a joke. Everyone knows that." The principal's expression hardened. It's not a joke when another student feels unsafe. And it's not a joke when there are witnesses. Half the school saw what you did. There will be consequences, and you're not going to laugh your way out of this one. Jake rolled his eyes, pretending not to care. But then the principal's tone shifted, quieter but sharper. "Her father's on his way here. You're going to explain yourself to him directly." Jake froze for just a second, caught off guard. "Her father? What's that got to do with me?" The principal straightened, his gaze unyielding. "Because her father isn't just anyone. He's Chief Daniels, the police chief of this town." The words landed like a hammer. Jake blinked, his smirk fading. "Wait, what?" You heard me, the principal said firmly. Chief Daniels is on his way. I hope you're ready to face him. For the first time, Jake felt the ground beneath him shift. Police chief? Maya's father was the police chief. His mind scrambled to make sense of it. Images of the tall, stern man in uniform flashed in his memory. The man he had seen on the local news, speaking confidently at community events, shaking hands with the mayor, leading officers during parades. That was her father? Jake swallowed hard, but his pride tried to cover the crack in his confidence. So what, he's just a cop? The principal shook his head. He's not just a cop. He's the chief. And he's a father who doesn't tolerate bullies hurting his daughter. Jake's bravado wavered. His stomach churned with a feeling he wasn't used to. Fear. The office door opened and in stepped Chief Daniels. His presence filled the room instantly. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even scowling. But his calm, commanding presence was enough to silence Jake completely. The man wore no uniform that day, just a plain shirt and slacks, but somehow he looked more authoritative than ever. His eyes locked on Jake, steady and unreadable. Jake shifted in his chair, suddenly feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Chief Daniels, the principal said respectfully, thank you for coming. As I explained, your daughter was targeted by Jake here. We need to address this situation immediately. Chief Daniels nodded, his gaze never leaving Jake. He took a slow step closer, his voice calm but firm. So, you're the boy who thought it was funny to put his hands on my daughter. Jake's mouth went dry. His usual sarcastic comebacks wouldn't come. His throat tightened. I didn't mean... Chief Daniels raised a hand, silencing him without effort. Don't lie. Half the school saw what you did. And Maya doesn't exaggerate. You tried to humiliate her. You shoved her through her books and mocked her in front of everyone. That's not a mistake, Jake. That's a choice. The room was heavy with silence. Jake's friends, usually by his side, weren't there now. He was alone, and for the first time he realized how weak he really was without an audience. You think being a bully makes you strong? Chief Daniels continued, his voice steady but full of quiet power. It doesn't, it makes you small. Smaller than the kids you target. You prey on others because you're afraid to face your own emptiness. You hurt others to feel big, but all it shows is how little you are inside. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. Every word pierced him like a blade. He had been called names before, scolded by teachers, punished by his parents, but this was different. Chief Daniels wasn't yelling. He wasn't insulting. He was speaking the truth, and the truth was harder to swallow than any punishment. You've got two choices, Jake, Chief Daniels said finally, leaning closer so his words struck like thunder. You can keep going down this path hurting people, thinking fear makes you powerful. And one day you'll end up facing someone like me again, only next time, it won't be in a school office. It'll be in a courtroom, or worse, a jail cell, or... He paused, letting the weight of silence sink in. You can learn from this. You can change. But make no mistake, you will face the consequences for what you did to my daughter. Jake felt sweat bead on his forehead. He wanted to disappear, to crawl out of the office and escape the piercing eyes of the police chief. But there was nowhere to go. The principal spoke up. Jake, you're suspended effective immediately. You'll also be required to attend counseling sessions and community service hours arranged by Chief Daniels' department. If there's another incident like this, the school will press charges. Jake's head sank. Suspension he could handle. He'd been suspended before. But counseling? Community service under the police chief's watch? The humiliation was unbearable. Chief Daniels leaned back, his voice calm once more. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. You need to learn that every action has consequences, and you need to understand that people like my daughter, people who carry themselves with respect and dignity, are stronger than you'll ever be until you change. Jake nodded weakly, unable to argue. For the first time, he wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He wasn't in control. He wasn't feared. He was just a boy who had gone too far, and finally hit a wall he couldn't break. As Chief Daniels turned to leave, Jake caught a glimpse of Maya standing in the hallway outside the office. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smirking. She simply watched with quiet strength, her head held high. And somehow that made Jake feel even smaller than the police chief's words. For the first time in his life, Jake regretted what he had done. The next morning at Jefferson High felt heavy. Like storm clouds were hanging above the building even though the sky outside was clear. Students walked through the halls buzzing with stories from the day before. Everyone knew Jake had been caught, that the principal had called his parents, and that Maya's father, the police chief, was involved. For Jake, the weight of it all felt crushing. He sat quietly in the principal's office again, but this time he wasn't alone. His parents sat on either side of him, their faces stiff with disappointment. His mother, tired-eyed and pale from her late shift at the diner, avoided looking at him. His father, a construction worker with rough hands and a stern face, sat stiffly, his jaw tight as stone. Jake had been in trouble before, but this was different. His parents had always brushed off his suspensions, chalking them up to boys being boys or teachers picking on him. But being called into the school to sit across from the police chief himself was another matter. The office door opened, and Chief Daniels stepped in. The room seemed to shrink the moment he entered. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just a plain shirt and jacket, but his presence carried the same authority. He greeted the principal with a firm handshake before turning to face Jake and his parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Chief Daniels said evenly, "thank you for coming. We need to have a serious conversation about your son." Jake's father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We've heard some of it already. I'm sure things got blown out of proportion. Kids fight. It happens." Chief Daniels' eyes narrowed, his voice calm but sharp. "This wasn't just a fight. Your son assaulted my daughter. He shoved her into lockers, threw her books down the hallway, and humiliated her in front of dozens of students. This wasn't a moment of anger. It was targeted, deliberate bullying, and it stops now." Jake's mother let out a small gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. She turned to her son, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jake, is this true?" Jake looked down at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. It wasn't like that," he muttered weakly. "It was just a joke. I didn't mean—" Chief Daniels cut him off. "Don't you dare call it a joke. You hurt someone. You tried to make her feel small to make yourself look big. That's not a joke, Jake, that's cruelty." The silence that followed was unbearable. Jake's father clenched his fists, his disappointment clear in the tight lines of his face. "Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you've brought on this family? Assault at school? Do you think this is funny?" Jake shrank back in his seat, his usual bravado gone. He had never seen his father look so angry, not the kind of anger that exploded in shouting, but the kind that burned quietly, like a fire that destroyed everything in its path. Chief Daniels pulled out a folder and laid it on the principal's desk. Inside were witness statements from students who had seen the incident, along with reports from teachers. He slid the papers toward Jake's parents. "These are the facts," he said firmly. "I could press charges. I have every right to. But I don't want to see a 16-year-old boy's life ruined before it even begins. What I want is for him to understand the seriousness of his actions and to take responsibility." Jake's mother wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice breaking. "Chief Daniels, we're so sorry, truly. I never raised my son to be cruel. I don't know what got into him." Chief Daniels' gaze softened slightly as he looked at her. "I believe you. But whether you meant to raise him this way or not, this behavior can't continue. If it does, it won't just be a school matter next time. It'll be a legal one." The principal leaned forward. "Jake, you've been suspended for 2 weeks. During that time, you'll be required to attend counseling sessions. On top of that, Chief Daniels has agreed to supervise your community service hours. You'll be cleaning public spaces, helping at the youth center, and working under direct supervision." Jake's head snapped up. "What? That's not fair. Why do I have to—" His father's hand slammed down on the desk, making everyone flinch. "Enough. Do you realize how lucky you are? He could have you arrested. You're going to do everything they tell you to do, and you're going to thank them for giving you the chance. Do you understand me?" Jake swallowed hard, his voice small. "Yes, sir." Chief Daniels studied him carefully, his expression unreadable. "Jake, I don't hate you, but I hate what you did, and if you want to become a better person, you need to face the truth about yourself. Bullying doesn't make you strong. It makes you weak. Respect, discipline, empathy, that's real strength. And until you learn that, you'll keep walking down the wrong path." For the first time, Jake's eyes flicked upward to meet Chief Daniels. There was no anger in the chief's eyes now, only truth, steady and unshakable. It was the kind of look that saw straight through him, down to the frightened boy he really was beneath all the swagger and cruelty. His mother squeezed his arm gently. "Jake, please. Don't throw your life away like this. His father's voice was firm, almost trembling with restrained emotion. You're going to make this right, son. No more excuses. No more lies. You're going to change, starting now. Jake nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. I'll try. Chief Daniels leaned back, his voice final. You won't just try, you will. Because if I hear about one more incident at school, at the park, anywhere, I won't hesitate to treat you like any other offender. And I promise you, Jake, the law won't be as patient as I've been today. The meeting ended with heavy silence. Jake's parents stood, thanking the principal and Chief Daniels for their time. As they guided Jake out of the office, he felt the stares of the students in the hallway, whispers following him like shadows. He had always been the predator, the one who made others feel small. Now, for the first time, he was the one who felt exposed, powerless, and humiliated. And worse than the punishment itself was the knowledge that he had been defeated not by fists, not by shouting, but by the quiet strength of the very girl he had tried to break. The days that followed felt like a slow, painful unraveling for Jake. Suspension might have sounded like a vacation to some students, but for Jake, it was anything but. Gone were the mornings of strutting down Jefferson High's hallways with his friends at his heels. Gone were the smirks and whispers of fear that had always fed his ego. Instead, he spent his mornings at home, sitting silently at the kitchen table while his father stared at him from across the room with disappointment in his eyes. His mother tried to make conversation, but the silence between them was heavy, like a wall none of them knew how to climb. The first part of his punishment was counseling. Jake didn't want to go. He dragged his feet as his mother drove him across town to a small office with a faded sign that read, Youth Guidance Center. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. A counselor named Mr. Harris greeted him with a kind smile. He was an older man with silver hair and glasses, the type who looked like he had spent his life listening to troubled kids. Jake slouched in the chair, arms crossed, waiting for the lecture he was sure was coming. But Mr. Harris didn't lecture. He asked questions instead. Why do you think you act the way you do, Jake? Jake shrugged, avoiding his eyes. I don't know. People just annoy me. Mr. Harris leaned forward, his voice calm. Or maybe hurting others makes you feel in control. Maybe it gives you the attention you don't get anywhere else. Jake stiffened. He didn't want to admit it, but the words hit too close. He thought about his father's harsh rules at home, about the loneliness that followed him like a shadow. He looked away, muttering, Whatever. But Mr. Harris wasn't angry. He simply nodded. That's okay. We'll figure it out together. But you need to understand this. If you keep hurting others, you're only hurting yourself in the end. Jake said nothing. But the words lingered long after the session ended. The second part of his punishment was community service under Chief Daniels' supervision. That was the part Jake dreaded most. The idea of working directly under the father of the girl he had bullied felt like walking into a nightmare. Yet there he was the next Saturday morning, standing awkwardly in front of the police station in old jeans and a hoodie, waiting for instructions. Chief Daniels arrived with his usual calm authority. He didn't scowl, didn't bark orders. He simply handed Jake a pair of gloves and a trash bag. You're with me today. We'll start at the park. The park was filled with children laughing and playing, families enjoying the sunshine. Jake trailed behind Chief Daniels, picking up litter, trying to keep his head down. He felt the stares of people who recognized him, whispers about how the school bully was now reduced to cleaning up garbage. Every piece of trash he picked up felt heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of his shame. At one point, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed. Mom, isn't that the boy who hurt the girl at school? The words pierced Jake like a knife. The mother hushed her son, pulling him away, but Jake had heard it loud and clear. Chief Daniels glanced at him but said nothing. The silence was worse than any lecture. It forced Jake to sit with the truth of what he had done. By the end of the day, Jake's back ached, his hands were sore, and his pride was in shambles. Yet something unexpected stirred inside him. For the first time, he felt the smallest flicker of what accountability meant, not just punishment, but facing the community he had hurt. The following week brought more of the same. Counseling sessions where Mr. Harris gently peeled back the layers of his anger. Long hours of community service where he picked up trash, scrubbed graffiti, and stacked chairs at the youth center. Each task chipped away at the false image he had built of himself as the untouchable king of Jefferson High. But the hardest part of all was facing the students when he returned to school after his suspension. The hallways that had once been his stage were now filled with whispers he couldn't control. Some students smirked at his downfall. Others avoided him altogether. And when he passed Maya, she didn't glare, didn't mock, didn't even speak. She simply walked by with her head held high, her quiet strength unshaken. Somehow that silence was worse than anything she could have said. Jake's friends, the ones who used to cheer at his pranks, began to drift away. Without his power, without the fear he had once commanded, there was nothing holding them to him. They laughed with others now, left him behind in the cafeteria, and avoided eye contact in the halls. Jake found himself sitting alone, his tray untouched, his appetite gone. The consequences weren't just rules and punishments anymore. They were the loss of everything he thought defined him. His reputation, his friends, his pride, all of it had crumbled, leaving him face to face with a truth he couldn't escape. He wasn't strong, he wasn't feared, and he wasn't respected. He was just a boy who had made terrible choices, and yet, in the quiet moments when he was picking up trash in the park, when Mr. Harris asked him to talk about his childhood, when he caught glimpses of Maya walking confidently through the halls, Jake began to feel something new. Regret, yes, but also a strange, unfamiliar desire. The desire to be better, to be someone his parents didn't have to apologize for, to be someone who didn't need fear to feel important. It was only the beginning. Change wouldn't come overnight, but the consequences had stripped him bare, forcing him to see himself for who he really was. And for the first time in his life, Jake began to wonder what it would feel like to earn respect. Not through fear, but through something real. The weeks that followed marked a quiet but powerful shift at Jefferson High. The hallways, once echoing with Jake's laughter and cruelty, seemed lighter without his shadow looming over them. Students moved more freely. Conversations carried a different tone, and a sense of relief hung in the air. For many, the bully's downfall was proof that justice, though sometimes slow, did exist. But the story wasn't finished. For Maya, life returned to its steady rhythm. She attended her classes, studied in the library, and walked the halls with her usual calm presence. Yet there was a new sense of respect surrounding her now. Students who once stayed silent when Jake lashed out would nod at her in passing. Some even whispered their admiration, saying she was brave, that she had stood up in a way they never could. Maya didn't seek praise, but she accepted it with grace. Knowing her quiet defiance had meant more than she realized. Her father, Chief Daniels, continued his work as he always did, protecting the community, enforcing fairness, and raising his daughter with love and strength. At home, he reminded Maya of what mattered most. "You didn't win because your dad is the police chief," he told her one evening over dinner. "You won because you refused to let fear break you. That strength was yours, not mine." Maya smiled softly, holding his words close. For Jake, the lesson was harder to accept. Returning to school after his suspension was like walking into a battlefield he had already lost. The fear and respect he once commanded had vanished. His friends no longer hung on his every word. Some mocked him behind his back. Others ignored him entirely. He was a ghost in the very place he once ruled. At first, Jake burned with anger. He hated the whispers, the stares, the way students looked at him like he was nothing. But anger soon gave way to something heavier, shame. Every time he saw Maya, walking confidently through the halls, he felt the weight of what he had done. He remembered her words, the way she had told him he was making himself look small, and he knew she had been right. Counseling with Mr. Harris continued. At first, Jake resented it. He sat in silence, arms crossed, waiting for the clock to run out. But little by little, something shifted. Mr. Harris didn't give up on him. He asked about Jake's family, his struggles, his fears, and slowly Jake began to talk. He admitted how invisible he felt at home, how picking on others gave him the only sense of power he knew. For the first time, someone listened, not to punish him, not to scold him, but to understand him. And that, more than anything, began to chip away at the walls Jake had built around himself. Community service became another unexpected teacher. Cleaning parks, scrubbing graffiti, and helping at the youth center wasn't glamorous, but it showed him something he had never considered. He saw how much work went into keeping the community safe and clean. He met kids at the youth center who looked up to him, not knowing his past, just seeing him as an older boy who could play basketball with them or help set up chairs. For once, respect came not from fear, but from kindness. One afternoon at the park, while Jake was collecting litter, Chief Daniels walked over. He didn't lecture. He didn't glare. He simply handed Jake another bag and said, "You're doing good work today." It was only a few words, but they struck Jake harder than any punishment. Approval, from the very man whose daughter he had hurt, felt like a second chance. The real turning point came weeks later, when Jake finally gathered the courage to approach Maya. It was after school, the sun setting low over the football field, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Maya was sitting on the bleachers, reading as she often did. Jake's footsteps crunched on the gravel as he approached, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Maya looked up, her expression calm but guarded. "What do you want, Jake?" He hesitated, his throat dry. Apologies had never come easily to him. He had spent his whole life pretending he was never wrong, never weak. But now, standing in front of her, the words he had held back for so long finally broke free. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "For everything. For the cafeteria. For the hallway. For treating you like you were less when you were more than me all along. I thought being feared made me strong, but it just made me pathetic. You were right. I made myself small." Maya studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching for the truth in his words. Finally, she nodded. "I don't need your apology, Jake, but I hope you mean it for yourself. Because if you don't change, you'll hurt more people, and one day there won't be anyone left to give you another chance." Jake swallowed hard, but he nodded. "I know, I want to change. I don't want to be that person anymore." For the first time, Maya saw something different in him. Not arrogance, not cruelty, but sincerity. She didn't forgive him right away. Forgiveness, she knew, took time, but she stood gathering her books and said quietly, "Then prove it." Those two words, simple, firm, stayed with Jake long after she walked away. Over time, Jake worked to prove it. He stayed in counseling even when his suspension ended. He completed his community service hours, showing up on time and putting in real effort. Slowly, the whispers in the hallways faded. Students didn't fear him anymore, but some began to respect him. Not for his power, but for his attempt to change. And though Maya and Jake never became friends, there was a quiet understanding between them. When their eyes met in the hallway, there was no longer hatred, only acknowledgement. She had stood firm in her strength. He had learned through regret and consequence what real strength meant. The lesson was clear, etched deeply into Jake's life. Cruelty only leads to regret. True strength comes from respect, from empathy, from standing tall without stepping on others. And Maya, calm, resilient, and unshaken, had been the one to teach it to him. Years later, students at Jefferson High would still whisper about the time a bully was brought to his knees not by fists, but by dignity. About how the police chief's daughter had stood her ground and shown everyone that courage doesn't always shout. It sometimes speaks softly, but carries more power than fear ever could. And Jake? He never forgot the day he realized the truth. The day he stopped being the bully and started learning what it meant to be human,